and welcome to Level Up Watches. This is the spin-off series from the Level Up and Friends podcast, where those of us from the video game and comic book store Level Up Entertainment in Mays Landing, New Jersey, and also in Summers Point, New Jersey, coming soon, are getting together with a few friends of ours to talk about the latest and greatest in pop culture entertainment. So for this series, we're going to be covering the latest entry in the MCU, which is the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We're going to go through it each episode, week by week. We're going to give you our recap, reviews, our insights, predictions, all that good stuff. But before we get into that, I'm your host, Harry, and it is my honor to be joined by the Sam to my Bucky, the Falcon to my Winter Soldier, the friend of the store, the one, the only, Marvelous Mike.
Hello, South Jersey. What's happening?
Welcome to the show, Marvelous Mike. Thank you very much for joining me. Before we really get into this meat and potatoes of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I just want to give the viewers at home, the listeners, a chance to get to know you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Well, all I'll say is the first words out of my mouth was Excelsior. So I have been a fan going back to the Silver Ages, if we can say. Well, no, so funny story. So I have known your host here for the better part of, well over 10 years by now. I would say close to 15. And had the privilege and honor to room with him at our small liberal arts college in Staten Island, New York. And he, loved Marvel, and I loved Jack Benny. And, those two just really didn't go together. But I'll say, not to get off of a Marvel kick, but he did introduce me to The Dark Knight, and fell in love with that series. So he had started laying, the groundwork for me to become a Marvel a fan, a superhero comic book fan, but it took until the coronavirus pandemic, that once in a century event, for me to have a once in a century event of a marathon of epic proportions. And I actually was going back through our texts, and feel free to cut me off at any time if we've lost any of our listeners by now. But it was last March 22nd that I had asked you, hey, send me the chronological list of Marvel. I'm going to give this a try. And you did. And it was a Sunday afternoon. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon last March 22nd. Went down into my basement, put on Disney Plus, and found Captain America, and absolutely fell in love with the MCU. It was not only the time period, maybe that's why I loved it so much. And
you also
Alan
relate
Menken.
with a 100-plus-year-old man.
Yeah, but just the storytelling, the cinematography, everything was at a level that was at the utmost professional, at the top of their game. And I was just blown away, and I said, I'm hooked, and I'm going to watch a movie a day. And Harry said, I'll believe it. I'll believe it when I see it.
Big order.
And the following day, I called my wife down and I said, we have to watch this together. And that was Captain Marvel is the second movie in the series. And we watched that, and she got hooked. And then on the third day, God created Iron Man. And that was, I think, really, we fell in love. I got my Tony Stark right here, the greatest superhero of them all, in my opinion, and I know yours as well. If I don't want to, I don't want to, cause any split amongst your friends by saying that. But we fell in love with Iron Man, and then every day we watched in order. For each movie in the MCU, even including Ed Norton as the Hulk, which we'll save for another time. But
you had a carefully curated list, because you said you started with Captain America. People may be like jumping through the computer screen right now to say like, that's not the first movie, but I specifically wanted to take you through the MCU chronologically, but there were some end credit scenes that you weren't allowed to watch. There were
That is
certain things
correct.
that, you had to watch in a different order. So everything was carefully curated for you to get the best experience possible.
You gave me the director's cut before, during, and after every movie.
And how spoiled were you? I mean, where the rest of us had to wait like years in between all these cliffhangers and all these things, you just had it right at your fingertips on Disney Plus to
We
go through.
really did. A movie a night. We started March the 22nd, and we finished Endgame on Easter Sunday last year. And that I think was probably the greatest cinematic experience that I've ever experienced. I watched it on my 65-inch TV screen. I wish it was on in a movie theater though, because that was just absolutely amazing. But now I feel like the rest of you schlobs that have to wait now 3 or 4 years in between each one for the next one.
Well, hopefully this podcast will help make that wait go by a little bit faster, because now Disney Plus has given us these Marvel Cinematic Universe shows. And while they've tried to do sort of tie-in TV episodic things before with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and there was a few of the Netflix shows, Daredevil, Iron Fist, things like that, I feel like this is the first time they've really incorporated the MCU proper. They've always made references to the movies, but you didn't have something like the Winter Soldier or Falcon just jumping into the show. There were very limited cameos. So how do you feel, starting with WandaVision that we just completed, now going on to Falcon and Winter Soldier? How do you feel about the episodic nature now of the MCU?
There's not enough. That is how I feel, going back to me being spoiled. Well, WandaVision, as a student of student of television and television history, that it was like a love letter to television. Those first few episodes, the way it was filmed, the way they even recreated the sets into the theme songs of the shows that they were paying tribute to, and then to go in not knowing where it's going, and then just to have that twist, I guess, at the end of the third or fourth episode, with everything that's going on outside. I don't want to, if people haven't watched yet, but outside the bubble was great. And what I've noticed about these series, especially the Disney series, and even on Netflix, Amazon Prime, is more so than conventional television, that each episode in and of itself is an event.
Mm-hmm.
That they make it as if we have to stand by. It's not going to be an episode that gets lost in syndication of 24 other episodes of a series. We're only doing 9 episodes. We're only doing 6 episodes. Each one has to reach greatness on its own. And I think that's probably the best takeaway of the series, without going into them individually.
Yeah, and that's why we wanted to do a spin-off podcast where we sort of recap and go through these series episode by episode. We didn't get to do it for WandaVision, but we did do a Level Up and Friends podcast recapping WandaVision. But we said, you know what, for Falcon and Winter Soldier, let's start it from the very beginning. We'll do each episode. So we're going to try to bring you a podcast spin-off episode every week covering the Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Was I supposed to watch it before this?
Well, you can just kind of jump in and guess as to what I'm talking about,
Well, actually, before we go off further, because I do have to say, and by the way, this Iron Man little tongue-in-cheek little wink to the audience is on the Shelby Foote History of the Civil War. So Iron Man sitting on the Civil War, that's for all you history buffs out there. And my new 2 collections, we have right off of Amazon, the Marvel 100 Greatest Comics,
mm-hmm.
and at a recommendation of our host, the Marvel Encyclopedia New Edition. So it was, studying up on some of the characters that we see popping up, but not too much because I don't want to give it away.
That's what I was going to ask. How much of those books have you really had a chance to read? Because you've been afraid about spoilers.
I use it just to prop up the laptop when
that's
I'm
what
on.
I figured. Yeah, that's what I figured. Because you are coming at this more from the Marvel Cinematic Universe perspective and that storyline, not so much with the comics. I have a little bit of mix of both. I know a little bit of the comics knowledge, but that doesn't necessarily give you too much of an advantage because the powers that be at Marvel Studios kind of know how to use your comics knowledge against you, which I kind of like. It's kind of fun.
Well, I'll just say this. You didn't even let me watch any of the trailers for any of the movies at any time during the the Marvel watch party from last year.
And you were better for it.
Well, that's true. And we saw Spider-Man in Civil War. That was a big surprise.
That was something that was spoiled in the very first trailer, that Spider-Man was going to be even in the movie. There was all kinds of rights issues and all kinds of red tape as to why that would not happen. But we wanted that to be an organic surprise for you. And I'm jealous that you got that experience. All right. So with that, let's jump into episode 1 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And this episode is titled New World Order. Before we jump into the actual episode proper, did you have any expectations about this series? Did you have anything that you wanted to see, or how are your feelings about these two characters going forward?
Well, it was funny. I thought it was, and I'm sure I thought it was going to be much more of a buddy series. Then the first episode led on, and we'll get to it, but very psychological, thriller-esque. The first episode really wasn't expecting that. I thought that coming off of Endgame, that Sam would have taken up the Captain America mantle, and it would have just been the two of them continuing to fight crime, not all of these backstories, which I guess they never really looked into these two characters on their own outside of the Cap. So interested to see where we go from here.
I think that's one of the benefits of doing these Disney Plus shows, is you sort of get the quiet moments that you don't get time for in a blockbuster film. And especially for these side characters like Wanda, like Vision, like Winter Soldier, like Falcon. I mean, we only see them go basically from battle to battle, and now we're getting, to see what their day-to-day life is like. And I like that. I think that's really cool. So jumping right in, the way that this episode starts, we get the voiceover from Endgame, where Sam is saying to old Captain America, and we only get the voiceover here, that he feels like the shield belongs to somebody else, doesn't fit him, and Cap tells him it's yours, it shouldn't. And you see Sam kind of getting ready while this voiceover is going on. He's wearing a suit, black tie. So you're trying to wonder, is he getting ready for a funeral? He's packing up the shield. They're keeping the fate of old Captain America sort of in mystery right now. And that's including Spider-Man Far From Home, which took place after Endgame. They had included Captain America as part of the memorial service. And here, we find out later that Sam was getting ready to do a ceremony at the Smithsonian where they were saying farewell to Steve Rogers. But is he dead? Where is Steve Rogers right now?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought I had assumed first that he was getting dressed for the funeral, but then I'm thinking, well, how does everyone explain? We had old Steve at the end of Endgame, and how do they explain that after the blip? And you do have this retirement of Captain America at the Smithsonian, but like you said, no mention of a memorial to Steve Rogers is ever mentioned. I just want to go back, though, to what you said about Sam feeling that he's unworthy for the Captain America shield. And to me, that was a sign of, well, that means he's, one of the greatest superheroes, thinking that he's not worthy to stand up and take Captain America's place. And I think that, that humility factor that, of course, our beloved Iron Man didn't always have all the time, will go, still love him though, that humility will help in show that he is a superhero in a class of his own.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit later some of the weight of taking on that mantle and what's kind of going through Sam's mind as he's processing that. Before we get to that, though, this show graces us with, don't forget, it's a superhero show. We get sort of a mission to remind us of Sam Wilson / the Falcon's abilities. We get to see him on a pretty much like a recapture mission, trying to rescue a army general from an organization that we're told is called LAF. And Sam is even confused as to what LAF is, and they basically just tell us that they're high-powered individuals. Um, I can tell you right now, there is no comic book connection there that I can find, unless they stand for something else. And people that may know more than me, go ahead and put it in the comments if you know what LAF stands for, but I couldn't find
Well,
anything.
I have a question on that. If I could, if there's a Q and
Yeah.
A part of this.
Oh, that's what this is all about.
I don't want to feel stupid. I don't want your friends making fun of me.
If you have the question, other people might have the question too.
Well,
So this could be helpful for
in
them.
the encyclopedia, I was reading about their involvement with the Thunderbolts, and I was wondering, is that related to any of these groups, or has that already come up in another area in one of the prior movies?
No, we haven't seen the Thunderbolts really come into action yet. The Thunderbolts, as far as my recollection, is that that's a team of villains that sort of to lessen their prison sentence, or to do good in the world, they use them for missions that nobody else wants to do. So I don't know if that's what this is referring to.
Okay,
However,
let's cut that part out because they don't think I'm an idiot.
However, while Sam is on this mission, one of the members of LAF, did you recognize him? One of the people on the plane? It's our old friend from the Winter Soldier, Batroc the Leaper, the villain that Captain America is fighting at the beginning of the Winter Soldier on the boat. He's fighting this villain in the beginning of that sequence when they're on the ship and they're trying to steal the plans.
It's been a long year. I don't remember all the movies.
That was like 20 movies ago. No, they brought back a villain from the Winter Soldier, which is appropriate because that's where we meet both of these characters. But it was a character named Batroc. He's from the comic books. It's funny because I have to give props to the Marvel costume department. The comic book character Batroc the Leaper is this old Captain America villain. He's known for jumping really good and kicking and stuff. And they've used him now twice here, and every time he appears in his comic book colors too: purple jacket, yellow shirt. You're gonna do your homework real quick, but he is one of the members of LAF, and in fact, he's the sort of the ringleader, it seems like, in this operation. And we see Falcon flying through airplanes, and then he's trying to chase them down. They're in these flight suits also, and they're flying through canyons, and we just get this really exciting action sequence to start off the show, where it's showing what Falcon can do. And we get a few more comic references here. Falcon calls out to Red Wing, which is his like personal drone, and the drone helps him get onto the plane, and it can follow his commands. In the comic books, Red Wing is a pet falcon of the Falcon. It was a bird, and it had a telepathic link to Sam Wilson. So I think the drone angle that they're going with here is a little bit better than getting a live bird, but it's nice to see that comic book connection too. And then one other connection that I want to talk about is the army agent on the ground who's kind of talking to Sam while this mission is going on. Basically, the thrust of the mission is Sam has to recover this army commander before they hit the Libyan border, or else there's going to be an international incident. And so there was an army guy on the ground that was calling out the coordinates to Sam. That agent is named Lieutenant Torres, Lieutenant Joaquin Torres, and actually in the comic books, he later becomes a sidekick and eventually the Falcon for Sam Wilson. So that's another name connection to the comics.
I just looked it up. They all are in the encyclopedia. So I'll be researching them after, if I'm invited back for week 2.
Of course. It was a blink and you miss it because the action sequence moves so quickly, and Batroc doesn't have any real defining features. It's not like James Bond where you can clearly tell the villains have some physical deformity. He kind of looks just like every other, Eastern European bad guy. But the first tip off was that he was speaking French, because Batroc is French. And then, if you look a little bit closer and Winter Soldier, that is the same actor and it's the same villain. So one of the things I want to say from this sequence I noticed was Batroc escapes at the end. Sam Wilson blows up the plane, but Batroc jumps out. So I don't know if we're going to see him again later. That's something I think we should all keep an eye on since they brought him back before. Anything else about this sequence stand out to you? The opening action sequence?
Well, I mean, just going back to what I said earlier, in like the cinematic scope of it, each battle sequence, the special effects are just, from a technical standpoint, uh, everything is always amazing. Nothing looks, half-assed
Mm-hmm.
or cheesy in that respect. So right from the beginning, you're on the edge of your seat. And I think we'll get into it more, but I think this is probably the most adult,
Yeah.
not only show outside of WandaVision, but also movie that they've made so far in the MCU under the Disney banner, at least.
Language was a little bit turned up,
Salty.
and then also Sam was just throwing those guys around and blowing up planes with them in them. I mean, there was no qualms about killing anybody, killing villains. I mean, they were toast. So
Yeah, that's what struck me from that battle sequence, that, oh wow, this is intense. This is not, let's just one punch knock them out, do what we have to do, and then forget about them. This was, we're in it to win it.
It was pretty serious. So after that, once Sam recovers the army general, we move to Tunisia, where he has a conversation with Lieutenant Torres. And during that conversation, we see Sam working on Red Wing because Red Wing took some damage. And I just thought this was a really nice touch, because one of the questions I have about the MCU moving forward is, who's going to keep up with all their technology? I mean, I think they leaned on Tony Stark to, upgrade the War Machine armor and take care of all their gear and all this stuff. Now that he's gone, who's going to take care of all this? And we see Sam has some electronics know-how to fix his own drone. And he even says, like, well, when the Air Force guys get a hold of it, like, they mess it all up. So I thought that was nice to see that, Sam, it was nice to show off Sam's technical know-how here. We also hear that one of the threats that Torres is looking into is this group called the Flag Smashers. And he's sort of tracking them on his phone. He's using geolocation. Flag Smashers is another reference to a comic book villain. It was, at the time, it was just one person. It was one villain. That person may or may not show up in the show. We will see. But in this case, it's referred to as a terrorist group who feels like the blip was a good thing for the world, and they want to see a world without borders and world without nations and all this stuff. I don't know, we see a little bit of them later, but I'm not sure if they're going to be the ongoing threat of this show or if it's just sort of a red herring. The Flag Smashers.
Yeah, I found that part funny when they were speaking of, really pro-globalism, that was being deemed the enemy. And you think of, well, Disney as the international conglomerate that it is, showing that, their enemy is anti-open borders, anti-globalist. That also just struck me as odd.
True. Good point. And here we also should say they've made it clear that this takes place 6 months after the blip. So this is very much dealing with some of the economic, political, emotional fallout of having half the world's population be gone, disappeared in a blink, and then coming back in an instant 5 years later. I'm surprised. I'm impressed that they're dealing with that instead of just sweeping it under the rug.
And I'd also like to see, and I hope they do carry this over in the other series and other movies, to the extent that they can, what is happening with all the Avengers during this time period, and how each of them, I guess, and it really is going to show, we saw what happened with Wanda, but how each is coping with having either been blipped and came back to fight Thanos, or, survived the 5 years and then took part in the end game battle, and what happens from there now that it's over.
Yeah, and I want to touch on this here. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but it goes to show how post-Endgame, how poorly the Avengers sort of planned for an eventuality where they disband, or where there's a few key members that are gone or dead or retired. There was no pension set up. There was no retirement plan. There was no mental health services. I mean, these guys all seem like they're really on their own. Wanda, we saw the effects of losing her family in her show. And here we're seeing very much the effects of a post-Endgame world for Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, who we'll get to, who seem to be left to almost their own devices as to, how to deal with this world. And it's just like, where's the Hulk? Where are the people who, they were the family, to bring these guys together? It just seems like these new Avengers, that second group that joined, maybe Ultron forward, they sort of got the brunt of all this mess of, no more Tony Stark. I guess that means the money's gone. There's no tower. There's no compound. Like, you're on your own. Good luck.
And how does that? Well, we saw a little bit with the Smithsonian, but then, well, I guess the end of the episode really shows how the government feels about this group, and are they thought of as, heroes and national treasures, or are they thought of more as of a problem, stopping governments from doing what they want to do rather than the people's will?
Well, that's a good point, because my other question is, are the Sokovia Accords from Civil War still a thing? Because a lot of these heroes, Wanda, Falcon, Sam Wilson, Bucky Barnes, they didn't sign the Accords either. So are they still fugitives? I mean, I don't know. It's something they haven't. The Accords are still a thing. We see a reference to them here in the Smithsonian scene, but what is the status of them, and what is the status of these heroes? I mean, we do find out Bucky Barnes got a pardon. Sam Wilson is contracting with the Air Force, so he's working closely with the government. But it does seem like the Avengers themselves are no more. It's no longer a group. The other thing I want to point out, there was a fun conversation here between Torres and Sam Wilson about the status of Captain America. There's apparently some online rumor that he's on a secret base on the moon. And I thought that was fantastic, because, that goes kind of to our point of, like, is he really dead? Are they hiding him? Where is he? Also, like with all these other things, there was a comic book storyline where there was a secret base on the moon, where Uatu, the Watcher, would watch over the events that are going on Earth. And it was in this big storyline called Original Sin. I won't get into it, but it involved Nick Fury and a secret base on the moon. And where is Nick Fury right now? In space. So, maybe there is something to this online chatter. We may see it come back, but just great reference. Great.
And
great
that's
reference.
Also another thing, like, I wouldn't get that reference, but all the inside references that they do for the diehard comic book fans. But to me, that is he on the moon. They're not taking themselves too seriously. They know that, people will be rumors and guessing about what's going on with the series, and they try and throw that in themselves, little tongue-in-cheek references. So it's another great reason why I enjoy them.
Yep. After this, we see what Sam Wilson was getting ready for, and it was this this sort of farewell to Steve Rogers at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian, it's great continuity here, because the Smithsonian we saw had a exhibit to Steve in The Winter Soldier. And now, continuing that, they've expanded on that exhibit quite a bit. And Sam Wilson is basically giving a speech in front of a crowd. And in the crowd, we see James Rhodey. Don Cheadle is back. That was a surprise. That was not something that had been rumored or leaked or anything. So great to see Rhodey. And Sam, giving his speech basically is saying how the world does need heroes. But a symbol is sometimes more about a man, but sometimes it takes that man to basically operate that symbol. And he was basically saying, like, there is only one Steve Rogers, and the shield is equal to Steve, and I'm not Steve, so I'm giving the shield back. And he's giving it, he was donating it to the exhibit. And,
I'm sorry, that should have been setting off red flags for everybody watching, I think.
Why is that?
I mean, well, just anytime someone has tried to do the right thing, I feel it comes back to bite them, not soon after. So again, you have Sam showing great humility, showing that he is unworthy, that there is only one, and that, I guess you don't realize it, but in the Marvel universe, there has been the Captain America for over 70 years, going back to World War II. So again, Sam not thinking he's worthy to carry on the mantle, carry on the torch. But then, the government's going to do what the government's going to do.
So speaking of that, the government, there is an official there in attendance that shakes Sam's hand and says, "Oh, thank you for coming forward. You're doing the right thing," and pats Sam on the back basically for turning in the shield. Interesting. We'll put a pin in that. We'll come back to that later. But in the meantime, Rhodey is also there, and he kind of grabs Sam and pulls him aside and says, let's take a walk and talk about this for a minute. And I really like this conversation. Basically, Rhodey is asking Sam why he didn't take up the mantle. He seems a little bit disappointed in Sam that he didn't decide to carry the shield forward. Rhodey gives us a little bit of background saying that the world is sort of a mess right now. The allies are no longer allies, and enemies are now friends, and things are crazy. Rhodey did survive the blip, so he was one of the ones that was active for the 5-year period. But I guess my question here was, well, okay, Rhodey, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Does that mean you're the new Iron Man? Like, what is going on here? But I think it was significant to have 2 sidekick characters to the legacy characters of Captain America and Iron Man having this conversation and talking about legacy and mantles and things like that. Also, I'll say this: I think the show may be addressing issues of race later, but these are 2 African American characters talking about legacy and the mantles of 2 non-African American characters. So there may be extra weight and gravity that you can read into this conversation there as well.
Definitely, I think the race conversation was, or intended to be purposeful, like you said, carrying on after 2 iconic white superheroes, and now that have one gone, one seemingly gone, and what happens, and how does that legacy continue for a new generation that is not the same as it was for the prior one.
Yeah, and as Rhodey says, the world is broken, and we're just looking for someone to fix it. So, I don't know.
And like you said, I hope they get into, what was going on since the blip in those last 6 months. What has happened? What are the power political structures that have happened? Because we took international politics, in our college heyday. So we remember the rise and fall of the great empires, but it would be cool to see, from the geopolitical stance, what's happening, how that played out, and how superheroes may realign depending on what's going on in countries.
And did they rebuild Citi Field? That's the question everyone wants to know. This was great. This was one of my favorite scenes of the episode, and seeing Rhodey was a treat. And he leaves this conversation by saying, we'll catch up, or I'll be in touch. So will we see him again? Who knows?
I do hope.
Did you see some of the artifacts in the Smithsonian exhibit
Yes.
as they were panning around? There was a little bit of some exhibits that were dedicated to Hydra, to Bucky, to the Accords. And then the wall that they're facing has different pictures from Captain America, the first Avenger from that movie. There's also a panel of the original Captain America #1 of him punching Hitler in the face, which, is a famous comic book cover. I love that in this universe, there are Captain America comics that came out about him. And I think that's a really nice touch. There was a beautiful Alex Ross painting, which was a very famous painting that existed outside of the movies that got brought in. So nice. And again,
I think a nice counterpoint to Winter Soldier, because if I remember correctly, when Bucky was in that exhibit, he was trying to figure out who he was.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have Sam in the same exhibit trying to figure out who he is and who he's going to be going forward. So great parallelism between the 2 scenes.
Nice point.
Thank you.
From here, we get a quick flashback to it seems like a man being ushered through an old hotel lobby, and it's not clear what's going on, and all of a sudden a metal arm busts through a wall and grabs a guy, and we have sort of this action sequence, and we see Bucky / the Winter Soldier in full Winter Soldier garb, long hair, he's got the mask on, and he looks very much like he did all those years ago in that movie. And at this point, I was kind of confused. I was like, oh, did Bucky grow his hair out again? Because, you haven't seen him in so long. But it turns out that this is sort of a nightmare, a flashback, a memory. And during that, it looks like, Bucky's dispatching people. He gives us the famous Hail Hydra as he chokes this old man to death. And then there's a young Asian man who's trying to frantically get into a door that's in the same hallway. Wasn't a part of any of the violence or anything that was going on, but he just happened to be sort of in that hallway at the time. And, Winter Soldier looks over, and if you've seen the movie, it's sort of a no witnesses sort of situation. So he goes over and you see him pull out a gun, and then you hear a gunshot, and then it flashes to present day Bucky waking up in a cold sweat on the floor. Did you think that this was something that was happening currently, in the past? What did you think about the Winter Soldier sequence?
Well, at first I thought it was happening currently, and that those were villains that he was attacking, until the last moment when he locked eyes with the young teenager, which again shows the importance of electronic key cards. If he had that, he'd be in the hotel room without any issues. So put that out there. For our friends.
Level Up Watches advocating for electronic key cards.
But no, I did think that it was he was fighting current villains up until that last moment where locked eyes and then realized, oh, wait a minute, Winter Soldier. And then, of course, he wakes up, or rather you snap out of it in the therapy session, which to me, go ahead.
Before that, he wakes up on the floor in like a sparse apartment building before they get into the therapy session, which I thought was a callback to Winter Soldier when Steve and Sam have the conversation about how when they came back from war, they couldn't sleep in their bed because it felt too soft. You're right.
Yes.
And I thought that was sort of a nice throwback to that.
Well, I was just saying, so not to jump the gun to
Let's go for it.
Well, the therapy session, and I thought just from a cinematography standpoint, the camera angles right above the heads, like looking into the minds of both Bucky and the psychiatrist, I thought was just very well done. And again, showing that the series is more adult. You're getting that emotional look into the characters, and it's not, superficial, just fighting crime, and that we're delving into something deeper here.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Bucky's therapy session. So it's nice to see that Bucky is in therapy and that he's getting help. That is something that I think a lot of these heroes could benefit from, and they don't take advantage of. But Bucky seems to be reluctantly attending these therapy sessions. He's not forthcoming with the therapist. Luckily, the therapist seems to be able to see right through him.
Who, of course, I loved from her stint. I don't know if there's any Raymond fans out there. Played the Girl Scout leader who beat up Ray Romano over Girl Scout cookies. If you've seen that classic episode. So it was nice to see her in this series as well.
Playing a similar character, it's also beating up our hero, Bucky. But no, this is where we find out that Bucky got a full pardon for his crimes as Winter Soldier, all those murders, including Tony Stark's parents. He is, now a free man, but he seems to be lost. He's shuffling, doesn't know quite what to do with his time. One of the things I really like that he says here is like, look, I've had one battle after another for 90 years. And if you think about it, other than he said, I had a little bit of calm in Wakanda, which, you can kind of watch the thread back through the movies and realize that ever since he enlisted and started in the war, in World War II, I mean, it's just been one battle after another for him. And he's never had like a moment's peace. He really didn't get a chance to have rekindle his friendship with Steve Rogers, which is really a shame because those two could relate the most. They're both men out of time. They were from a different age. They're now living in the present. But he's been brainwashed. The poor guy's been experimented on. He's had his arm removed, put back together. I mean, it's only been one thing after another for him, and that's all he seems to know is fighting.
And especially, like you said, there's that one scene where I guess when they're on the date, how old am I? It's 106 or something like that. And you realize, yeah, he has been doing this for all that time, whereas Cap, lay dormant for how many years, 50 plus years, only to reawaken. Um, but yeah, here is a man who's never really lived the life that he wanted to and has struggled throughout all of it. So
Yeah.
to see him finally getting help and seeing how much he actually has to deal with.
Yeah. This is also where we find out that Bucky keeps what he calls an amends list. And he's trying to, it reminded me very much of when we hear the Black Widow talk about her ledger, and she has red in the ledger and she's got to clear it. It seems like he's sort of atoning for some of the things that happened as the Winter Soldier, or that he's trying to correct. So we see a sequence where the therapist goes through 3 rules, and I don't know if these are going to come back in the series or not, or if it was a big deal, but they went through 3 rules. I wrote them down. Let's talk about them. But basically, rule number 1 is that he's not going to do anything that's illegal. And it flashes to this situation in a parking garage with Senator Atwood, which I wrote that down because I was like, I'm going to name check this later and see if there's any comic book connections, but I didn't really see anything. And who Senator Atwood was a Hydra pawn that he helped install as the Winter Soldier. So he attaches a device to her car and starts taking control of it. So he's telling his therapist, no, I didn't do anything illegal. I just tried to set this right. Rule number 2, nobody gets hurt. Well, he walks up to the car once it's under his control and punches the senator's aide or whoever she's talking to in the face in the car. And then number 3, he just introduces himself, and he says, I'm James Buchanan Barnes. I'm no longer the Winter Soldier. I'm here to make amends. And then he called the police and kind of let them mop up the Atwood situation. When he finishes this story, he pulls out a notebook and he crosses her name off of a list. If you pause that notebook, there are other names on the page. One of the names is H. Zemo, which, if you know from Civil War, is Helmut Zemo, who was the main villain in Civil War, who reactivated his brainwashing. So that was one of the names that really jumped out to me on the list. There are a few others that are Easter eggs, but I think that we may be coming back to Zemo's name on that list.
And at least for me, when, do nothing illegal and then basically locks them in the car and self-drives it, that to me was like, okay, so we're really not going by these, this credo. And how far is he willing to push the envelope in order to make amends? Is he fully, turned over a new leaf, and he'll do whatever he can to make amends to as he is a new person, or will he still revert back to that old Winter Soldier tactics if he feels it's necessary to right all the wrongs?
Mm-hmm.
And so I also think that'll be, and of course that's always the conflicting battle between a lot of these superheroes pushing the envelope. So I hoping that that'll come up in the later episodes.
It's definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward. And then the other thing that we find out is that Sam has been reaching out to Bucky. He has texts on his phone, but he has not responded. Bucky's not responding. He's kind of shutting down. The therapist goes through his phone and says, there's less than 10 people here in your phone. Go make some friends. Go find some people. And, Bucky says it's been really hard for him, which, interestingly enough, the show then jumps us to Brooklyn. And I don't know if the therapist session was in Brooklyn or not, but it gave us a new title card that we were in Brooklyn. So I'm sure you were very happy about that. But Bucky basically walks in on an alley argument between a young guy and an older Asian man who's named Yuri Nakajima. And he's clearly very familiar with Yuri. They talk about, he says, oh, let's go get lunch. Let's go down to Izzy's. I'm buying this time. So, I don't know whether or not Yuri was one of the 10 numbers or not, but it seems like, he is trying to make friends, and he did get to know this guy on some level to the point where they're having lunch at least semi-regularly. I don't know.
I thought it was I thought that they were friends from way back when as well, that they may have crossed paths, 70 years ago and are catching up after lost time. But
you never know. You never know.
It's not proven correct.
This also sort of gives us another connection to Captain America, Captain America, the First Avenger, the first Captain America movie, where we first meet Bucky Barnes and he's breaking up an alley fight between Steve Rogers and a bigger bully. Here, Bucky Barnes is breaking up an alley fight between Yuri and this young guy. So thought that was a nice little throwback. Nakajima, he's looking out for his buddy Bucky, though. They're out at lunch and he sees Bucky sort of looking at the young waitress, and he's like, why don't you ask this girl out? And Bucky says, no, I'm good. And then Nakajima asks the girl out for Bucky, which I thought was kind of a funny sequence, because Bucky says he hasn't really danced since 1943. He keeps making like these side remarks about like how old he is, and I don't think any of the characters are ever actually listening to him. He's just like, by the way, I'm 100. And nobody seems to really be paying any attention. It
was referenced quite a lot, and you do wonder how many of them actually know. But the scene there, you did see him looking out for him, sort of in, I'm sure we'll get to it, like a father-son way. There was some type of bond there. That how long has it been there? Why was it formed? And without giving away the end of the episode when we'll get to it.
This is where we find out that when Yuri's looking at the mochi sitting on the counter, and he gets very sad and sort of wistful, and Bucky asks him what's wrong, and he says that his son really enjoyed that dessert, and that he lost his son some time ago, and he says that he never found out what happened because his son died overseas or abroad, and they only just told him that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but he felt like something had happened that shouldn't have happened, and he feels an emptiness in his life. And you see Bucky sort of get solemn as well, but they don't really go into why or explain what's going on, because they just kind of on to the next scene. Here at this point, this is where we start getting into Louisiana and some of Sam's background. We meet Sam's sister, who's named Sarah. Turns out Sam has 2 nephews that have grown up in his absence while he's been away on the blip. They own Wilson's Family Seafood. They have this old boat with the title Paul and Darlene, which is named after Sam and Sarah's parents, which are their actual names in the comic books, which is kind of cool. And Sarah is his actual sister from the comic books, which is kind of a nice touch. Sam and Sarah are fighting over what to do with the boat. Sarah wants to sell it. She wants to kind of move on. Sam feels like it's one of the few things that in the house are the 2 things that their parents left them, and that they should be doing more to fight to save it, to keep it going. Clearly, Sarah is behind on payments. She needs to take out some loans or something because she's in danger of losing the house. And Sam is trying to do whatever he can to help her. He's saying, we should try the banks. We should go here. We should do this. And Sarah's like, look, I've tried all that. And Sarah kind of gives us the impression of she was left holding the bag to keep this family together, to keep her family together during the 5 years that Sam was gone. And I don't know if their parents passed away during the 5-year period. They don't really talk about too much about what happened to the parents. But, clearly she, I think, resents Sam for being gone and then just showing up and demanding things to be his way when she's been living by herself, raising 2 boys on her own. We find out later she's a widower, and she's had no help. So I don't know. What did you think of Sarah when you first met her?
I was unsure where they were going with that storyline, but like you said, it shows the emotional level that the blip had on those that didn't blip. and the effects of everyone coming back, and how, you know, folks that finally got on with their lives, and were, you know, doing the best they can, you know, now have to deal with everything being changed once again on them, and finally getting over a loss, only to realize that they are now back, but have missed five maybe substantial lives, or rather 5 substantial years in their lives. And going to the bank scene where they get denied for the loan, again, you have the bank teller who's so excited that it's Falcon, you know, is taking pictures with
Takes him a minute to recognize him at first. You know, I know this probably happens to you on the street too. It's just
more often than not, I'll tell you that. But again, it echoes that, wow, you're a superhero, you know, you're so great, you did so much for us, but we're not going to help you. We are always expecting you to help us, and that's what we want from you, and that's why we love you, but we're not going to go the extra mile to help you, even after everything that you've done.
Yeah, and you know,
and again, another, you know, the racial underlines of redlining and loans, as well, from banks, permeates throughout that scene as well.
Yeah, I think they tried to play it both ways there, because I think Sarah definitely took some offense to the way that loan officer had treated them, and says, oh, you know, things always seem to tighten up, you know, when we come along. But he tried to backpedal a little bit and say, no, it's just the matter of, you know, 5 people or 5 years, and half the world's population coming back. You know, we're tightening everything up. You know, the rules have changed for that reason. It's for everybody. And I, you know, I don't know if he was being genuine or if not, you know, and what that meant there. They did say that their family has banked at that bank for a long time. But yeah, they get denied the loan, and Sam, you know, Sarah told Sam that was what was going to happen, but Sam felt like his celebrity would sort of get them through it. And, you know, he's kind of like, yeah, I'm an Avenger, but he has to keep bringing the loan officer back to the loan. He's like, all right, so I want to talk to you about this loan. And this is where we find out that, you know, they didn't have any kind of pension. They don't have any kind of benefits. The loan officer says, well, you have no income for 5 years. And Sam's like, well, I've been gone for 5 years. What do you expect? You know? So, you know, it's sad almost in how the Avengers, the new Avengers, or the superheroes, are now having to sort of skimp and save and scrape together to make any kind of life for themselves. And Sam said that they sort of operated on goodwill for all this time. I don't know how much of that is true. In the comic books, the Avengers did get a very nice, like, stipend every 2 weeks or so when Tony Stark is alive, and even if Tony Stark is dead for whatever reason in the comic books, his funding still kind of continues as long as he has money. He's gone bankrupt several times, but there's always, the money is never an issue for many of the Avengers in the comic books. And it's one of the funny things about Spider-Man, just to go off for a second. Spider-Man always desperately wants to join the Avengers so he can actually make some money for once, because he's a poor kid, he can't make any money. But here it doesn't seem like the case, and at least not now, not post Endgame. It seems like everybody's on their own.
And I'm curious to see the Avengers that didn't blip, if their situation is different when we come across some of those characters later on.
I think Rocket Raccoon was like doing zoo animal tricks, you know, for money for a while, and it's just that's how he got by. So we jumped to the bank, but I want to go back to Bucky's date. Bucky has his date with the girl, and not too much of consequence happens here, but they start flirting, and they seem to be hitting it off pretty well. They play Battleship, and she just stares at Bucky, and he's like, what are you looking at? And she goes, I'm reading your mind. And in any other show, in any other franchise, universe, that kind of a statement is like, oh, that's cute. You know, they're playing Battleship. Like, that doesn't mean anything. But this is Marvel, darn it. And I wrote that down because if this girl comes back 3 episodes from now and she's a mind reader from the X-Men or something, you know, I want to say that we covered it here first.
You heard it here first, folks.
Bucky also mentions here that,
and I'll say that Marvel doesn't seem to do anything unintentionally. I'll say
They
that.
caught a lot of flack for, there was an offhand reference in WandaVision to Monica Rambeau said that she knew this aerospace engineer that would help them with their problem with the hex. And for 3 episodes, people were like, "Oh, does this mean it's the Fantastic Four? Is it Reed Richards? Blah blah blah." And like people were just cartwheeling crazier and crazier theories. And it turns out it was just a normal scientist that helped her build a rover. And like people were freaking out because they were so angry that their theories were wrong. So Marvel, you got to be careful dropping this kind of stuff, because comic book fans, now they're trying to figure out what telepath was an Asian waitress, and how do we connect the dots here? You never know who could show up.
See, that's why I feel like I'm in a good position. I don't get crazy like that. I'm just, all right, let's see what happens next Friday.
Yet you're a co-host on a podcast about the show.
Yeah, I don't know what contest I lost that you had to find me.
All right, bringing it down a little bit. Bucky starts to kind of, either he realizes or he's putting the pieces together, but the girl tells him on the date, I think it's really nice that you and Yuri are getting along. You're getting him out. He seems like a different person since his son died. And she talks about how there's no word for a parent that loses their child. It's the ultimate sadness. And Bucky abruptly leaves the date. I mean, he barely says goodbye. He just walks right out of a restaurant. And the next scene, he's in Yuri. He goes to Yuri's apartment.
That's something we've all experienced in our lives. Or just me? Okay.
No. All I have to do is say, "Hey, let's talk about the MCU," and usually right out the door.
And then you're left holding the chicken fingers.
So Bucky goes right to Yuri's apartment. He knocks on the door. Yuri answers, and Bucky looks, and he kind of looks over Yuri's shoulder, and you can see a picture on the mantle, and it's sort of a memorial shrine to Yuri's son. And the picture is the same young man that we see in the flashback earlier that Bucky shot in the face for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I don't know if Bucky always knew that was his father, or that was the connection there, because he crosses Yuri's name off the list, or he circles it on his list, or if he was just kind of putting the pieces together as he was getting to know this man. But clearly there are some unresolved issues there, and some remorse.
And you wonder if Yuri knows.
Right, because Yuri is kind of confused as to why Bucky is there at his door, and Bucky makes up a quick excuse that he's paying him back for lunch from earlier that day. So, don't know. Let's talk about Switzerland for a minute and meeting the Flag Smashers. So we see Torres. He's taking it upon himself to research this organization. He's following some prompts on his phone, and he meets an individual that he's asking around. He's like, "Oh, so what do we do?" And he meets an individual, starts passing out masks with like a red handprint on them on the face, and all of a sudden alarms ring out. And we see an individual jump from like the second story of a Swiss bank and land on the ground. And then all chaos breaks out. Everybody wearing masks starts running around. And, it's kind of like the Joker scene from The Dark Knight, speaking of The Dark Knight, because, everyone's wearing the same masks. There's chaos. They're passing off the money bags. The police can't really figure out who's got what. Torres is trying to figure things out on the ground, and he knocks over a police officer and apologizes, and he tries to confront the big ringleader, the man who jumped out of the building. And first of all, that the man kicks a police officer or a guard or something, and the man clearly he flies into a pole, dents the pole, lands on the ground. Torres tries to confront him. He gets lifted up over the guy's head and just thrown on the ground like he's a rag doll. Something is enhanced or some kind of super strength for this ringleader of the Flag Smashers.
Which makes me think he didn't do his research enough. That you think you're actually going to get this guy, the ringleader, with one foul swoop by yourself. So that obviously did not work out for him. But you wonder where he did get that strength from, and is there some type of, and this is my, we're going to do predictions,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
do
yeah.
think that there is a Hydra element that's running still through this series.
So you think Hydra's still around?
And or a reincarnation of it.
Cut off one head, two more grow in its place.
That has taken place since the blip,
Mm-hmm.
or during the blip.
Clearly, this individual is enhanced in some way, and in a way that we haven't seen before. Like I said, Batroc or Bartok, the leaper, he didn't have this sort of strength in the past. So the man, the ringleader, jumped out of a second-story building without any sort of reaction at all. He kicked a guy into a pole. He picked Torres up, like he was nothing. I mean, there's something going on here with this organization that clearly, I don't know if they're related to the LFA or LAF that we heard about before, but there's enhanced individuals going on here. We'll probably find out more about that later.
And that'll just keep them out of the Baseball Hall of Fame for the foreseeable future.
No votes for them. Torres, I thought Torres was dead. I mean, he got his face kicked in, and the screen goes to black.
Like 5 minutes later, he's outside the ambulance. Hey, buddy.
Yeah, he calls up Sam after the bank incident. He calls up Sam, and he's kind of filling Sam in. Sam, to his credit, Sam's like, "Look, you should have waited for me before you jumped in here." But Torres is sort of giving him the rundown and showing him some of the footage, and Sam's like, "Okay, I'm going to get involved with this." But before Sam can really get into it with Torres, Sarah comes in and interrupts their conversation, and she says, "Sam, there's something going on TV. You got to see this." And she turns on this breaking news report, and it's a U.S. official standing at the podium. It's the same guy who thanked Sam, shook his hand for turning in the shield, told him he's doing the right thing. And he basically is at this podium saying, look, the time is now for the U.S. to have a new hero. Our recent events have led to this. So I don't know if he's alluding to the Switzerland incident or just crime in general is on the rise, but he clearly says like recent events are the cause for this. So it's time for a new hero. And you can see on Sam and Sarah's faces, they kind of see where this is going. But he says, I'm happy to introduce that we have a new Captain America. And like the doors open behind the official, and we see sort of the camera is from behind. We see the shield. It's Captain America's original shield that the guy's holding. He's walking down the steps. I'm looking at the costume, and you can see at his hip, he's carrying a gun, which is something that the original Captain America did not carry, at least not in the movies. He has the shield, and then he steps up to the podium. He smiles at the camera. He winks, and then it fades to black, and that's the end of the episode.
Now, I know you said, and I was going to look it up, but you yelled at me not to, who this new Captain America is. But before we get to that, I'll throw a theory out.
Okay.
But first, and again, going back to this theme of the government trying to control its superheroes. Government created Captain America, and the Avengers sort of go off and do their own thing that, as we know, gets them into trouble in Civil War. And maybe there was this thought by the government that, if Sam does become the new Captain America, he's not going to do what we need him to do. And we're going to create a Captain America that's going to do what we need to do. And that maybe, the United States is not the good country anymore after the blip, or maybe stuff has happened that, leads them to not need a true superhero, but just one that'll do its bidding.
It's a good theory, good point. I think that the thing that stands out to me is, on the one hand, this official is telling Sam, "You're doing the right thing. Thank you for coming forward, donating the shield to the museum."
Okay, can I give my theory right now?
Oh, sure.
And again, don't make fun of me. People.
No.
Not you. The rest of your comic book people. Is that the actual Captain America shield that he gave back?
Good question. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Is
that a theory out there, or did I just make that up?
I haven't heard that one yet.
Right.
So
Well, if it does happen, you heard it here first.
I will say, I'm trying to think if there was any other instances of like a fake shield out there. And there was an Easter egg in Iron Man 2, which was before the first Captain America movie was even made, where Iron Man is working on the new element and he's talking to Coulson and he's trying to figure out how to balance like a pipe. And he's like, oh, where'd you find that? Bring that over here. And it was like a prototype Captain America shield that was like half constructed. And Coulson gives it to him. He's like, do you know what this is? And he's like, yeah, it's perfect. It'll, balance out this pipe. And so we did see a fake shield there. And that was just sort of a one-off Easter egg, just a joke. It wasn't even the shield that they used in the movie. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that could have very well have been a prop shield. It just seems like Sam was genuine about wanting to give that away.
Right. I'm just trying to make news here. I'm just trying to get on.
That's okay. No, I appreciate the theories because you're coming at it from a different perspective than I am. So I think it's going to be fun to track your theories or predictions as we continue through the series. I can give you one thing, and it came from the credits. The credits I thought were fantastic. They would have different pieces from the histories of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. For example, they had a page out of Bucky's brainwash book that had the code words on it. They had like a small sliver of that, and they would put text out, and then they'd kind of redact the text like a government document and replace it with the name of the actor. And there was a few images that were like recruitment posters in the credits that said Cap is back, John Walker. So the name of this new Captain America is John Walker. And don't open it up. Don't read about it. If you listeners, if you want to look into
he is in here.
The storyline, look up John Walker or look up the U.S. agent storyline, and it may give you some hints as to what is to come in this series. Also, there may be some connections here to the Sam Wilson Captain America storyline from a few years back. It'll be interesting to see if that comes into play. But all right, so that is episode 1 in the books. Basically, Sam and Bucky don't even cross paths. They're not even together. But here, the status quo. We have a new Captain America out there, government sponsored. Sam's not too happy about it. He looks down in disgust. How are you feeling? What were your impressions of the episode?
Well, I guess everything that I've said, but I'm a little disappointed that it's only 6 episodes this series, and I'm hoping for longer episodes. That there was so much to unpack in this first episode, between Sam being left to figure out how to fend for himself, Bucky figuring out to deal with all his mental issues and his new life, and then all these enemies that are popping up. Will everything be resolved in 6 episodes, or will it be a cliffhanger that we have to wait for one of the movies? So,
well, I will say this, where we sort of knew that WandaVision was a one and done series, like it was just the 12 episodes or whatever, and it was finished. I don't know if I can say the same about this series. And I think recently Marvel's sort of guru who's overseeing all the movies and the TV stuff, Kevin Feige, he recently said that, some of our Disney Plus series could continue to more than one season. But it'll be interesting. I don't know if this is one of those series that will have more than one season, but it is only 6 episodes.
Yeah. And I just have loved how they've created everything to lead into something else. And I would hate for them just to continue a series without having everything planned to lead to something else in the MCU, which I don't think they would do. But
and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had this problem where it couldn't air certain episodes before a movie was released, because the things that happened in the episodes dealt with directly whatever movie was in theaters at that time, and then the rest of the season would air. In this situation, because of COVID, we were supposed to be, knee deep in phase 4 by now. The Black Widow movie should have been out by now. This series should have been finished. The WandaVision should have been long finished. So they had to shuffle some pieces around because of COVID.
And you actually said this was supposed to air before WandaVision originally.
Yes. Yep. It was supposed to air before WandaVision. But they were kind of in the middle of production when COVID hit, and then they decided to move forward with WandaVision, which I think was a little bit closer to being finished. And chronologically, I think it makes more sense in the way that they did it, because WandaVision takes place like right after Endgame pretty much. And this takes place 6 months later. So it makes sense for them to have waited.
And we also, we'd be remiss if we didn't point out the news that Disney Plus is releasing Black Widow.
Oh, yes.
Or rather, Disney is releasing it in the theater on the same day on Disney Plus. And now, as a Marvel fan for longer than I, how do you feel about that? Because it's it's a shared experience these movies have become. Would you be content, watching it in your basement without, around 100 people?
If it being Black Widow,
for it.
it being Black Widow and being like an individual hero movie, I feel more comfortable watching it at home. It's sort of like a Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's like a WandaVision. If it was Avengers Endgame, like, they are so lucky that COVID didn't hit a year earlier to conclude that storyline. That shared experience, that movie experience, is something that I will always remember. That audience reaction when Cap catches the hammer. It's like that. There are YouTube videos out there that are still circulating around of, just the theater going crazy. And that's something that I would not give up for the world. So I don't think we're going to get a jaw-dropping moment like that in Black Widow. So I feel better about seeing that at home. I don't know if I want to pay the $30 or whatever to Disney Plus to watch at home. But, I think the next movie that would have that kind of an effect may be Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, just because they're dealing with the multiverse, and we'll see who shows
who else
up.
might be popping up.
Yeah. So yeah. Anything else about episode 1, New World Order? They've kind of a lot of table setting in this episode, getting us sort of reacquainted with Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes and where they're going to go.
Yeah, well, I think they got a lot to do over the next 5 episodes. So I'm ready. I'm ready for some more action. And like I said, there's really a psychological thriller component to the series, which I'm going to enjoy a lot.
It's a lot of fun. It's going to be a fun ride. I'm glad to have you with me as we go through it. Before we go for this week, do you have anything that you want to talk about for the audience at home?
Well, I feel if I plug the eBay store that your comic book friends would not be happy with me about that. But we'll
be in touch about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about a sponsorship deal. Well, I actually have my own video podcast with I actually on Staten Island run an organization that honors and celebrates theater in the high schools here on Staten Island. It's called the Minty Organization, and this year we're celebrating our 10th anniversary of the Minty Awards.
Very nice.
Which honors and celebrates the program. So we've actually started a video series where we're welcoming back some alumni, playing some clips. Not that any of you will have any vested interest in any of those people, but you could check us out on Minty Awards on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and you could catch some really talented folks doing some real good theater.
Well, just to tie it back, and something that I will be forever
that is true.
jealous of you.
Actually,
you had a cameo involved with the Minty Awards.
My friend from high school was on, I forget the name of it, but it was Stan Lee had a Who Wants to Be a Superhero show.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend was on it, and he was the first person that was voted off in the first episode. But Stan Lee loved him so much, gave him a job, and worked with Stan Lee up until his death. And in 2013, my friend and Stan Lee sent us a video congratulating all the students in that year's Minty Awards. And he ends it with saying, with great power, you know the rest, Excelsior. And that is a video that I treasured in 2013, but now even more so.
I remember 2013 pretty well, and you were like, oh, look what I got Stan Lee. I don't even, whatever, Stan Lee, who's he? It was not a big deal to you back then. And now,
now it is
I wish I knew him better.
Memories.
Yeah.
Then they are not going to allow me back next week because of that.
It's like, meet me at the Minties, Excelsior. And I was like, oh my God, you got Stan Lee to say your made up award show name. That's so cool. So
can we cut to black?
Before we do that, we are Level Up Watches. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you'll join us for the next few episodes. We'll have a few more co-hosts and guests, and we're going to cover episode 2. We're going to try to release these midweek to give people a chance to watch the show before we spoil it. But please leave comments if you've enjoyed this. I hope you do. We'll be back. Mike will be back regardless of whether or not we fire him. We'll just drag him back on. We are a part of the Level Up Entertainment Network, and so please go visit the Level Up online store, shoplevelup.com. Check out all of the cool video games, comic books, all the tie-ins. If you want to know more about John Walker and the U.S. agent, so that you can, kind of learn more about it, you can probably find some of those comics on the website right now. I don't know if we have that graphic novel in stock, but I'm sure we have plenty of stories involving Falcon and Winter Soldier, so you can impress your friends at the next Battleship date night. How's that sound? All right. With that, Marvelous Mike, thank you very much for joining me this week.
It's been an honor. I do hope I'm invited back next week. If not, it's been fun.
Open invitation. I have been Harry. This is Level Up Watches, and we will see you next week. To be continued.
Good night, everybody.